Well, I'd like to welcome you to our fifth part in a series on apologetics that we're calling Knowing What You Believe and Why You Believe It. And today what we're going to do is we're going to be in the first part of a two-part series, and we're going to use an argument by William Lane Craig. William Lane Craig is one of the most well-known Christian apologists in the world. I think he has the distinction of debating more people than any other apologist in the world as a Christian, as far as public debate. And William Lane Craig has written a ton of books. I think he's written over about 50 to 60 books, and almost all of those have to deal with the subject of apologetics, a few in philosophy, a few in theology. But probably his most well-known book is called A Reasonable Faith. It's used as a textbook in a lot of Bible colleges and seminaries around the world. So what I'm going to do today and our next time together, we're going to do part one and part two, just because there's 5 main points that William Lane Craig utilizes in this particular argument for the existence of God. It's not particularly complicated, and he uses a lot of different arguments on this very topic on does God exist. And there's others that perhaps are even better than this one, but I want to give you an idea at least of what the classical view of apologetics looks like. We talked about a few weeks ago, we talked about the different types of methodologies that apologists use. And my particular favorite is the classical view. So I'm going to give you a few different apologists in the weeks to come. We're going to use William Lane Craig, we're going to use R.C. Sproul, and probably even a few others in the weeks to come to give you what's called the classical method. And in the classical method, just by way of review, a classical apologist will primarily use philosophical or natural reasons and then go to the Bible after that. And what they're basically trying to do is they're trying to say, hey, what do we hold in common with natural man, with just people that don't believe in God or they don't believe in Christianity? Where's the starting point that you would use with them? So I want to give you the actual reasoning and the actual argumentation and logic of William Lane Craig in this week's session and next week's session. And I'm going to give you 5 points that he gives to get you to the gospel, starting with arguments for the existence of God. And what you're going to notice, what he does is he doesn't appeal to the Bible right away. And so classical apologists deal to the natural world, to reasoning, to natural phenomenon, to logic. And that's the starting point in building a bridge with somebody who's not a believer to take you then to Christ and to take you then to the Bible. So the starting point is not the Bible for a classical apologist. Okay, so if you didn't get all that, don't worry about it, and you can always go back and look at the other, the previous episodes that we've had that deal more with methodology. And we're going to be reiterating a lot of terminology that you may or may not be familiar with. Again, you have in your below watching this on YouTube, if you scroll down under the video, there is an outline for you to follow with recommended resources, and that'll give you more information and take-home information and so forth. That hopefully you're keeping a file on this. I'm doing that myself. I'm keeping an apologetics file, and that would be helpful for you to do. Either keep a notebook or a file where you can keep all these outlines together. And this will help you, especially when you encounter different people or different arguments along the way that are more relevant when you're actually dealing with the particular question or particular issue that we're dealing with. Okay, so what we're going to do again is we're going to look at today, we're going to look at the first 2 arguments, And the very first argument we're going to look at, which I wrote down here, is that God makes the best sense of the origin of the universe. We already looked at this a few weeks ago when we talked about a simple way, if you only have 10-15 minutes, to be able to get to answer the question that somebody says, or the objection where they say there is no God, using G-O-D, the goodness of God for G, talking about morality, and that's one of the things we're going to look at next week. We're also, the O was origin, which we're going to talk more about today, in the G-O for origin. And then the D was design, which we're not, which we're going to look at a little bit today in a different way, talking about the fine-tuning of the universe. So we're going to look at William Lane Craig's first 2 points this time together, and then next time together we're going to look at the last 3 points. This is going to be a little bit longer today than next week, and that's one of the reasons I broke it up. I don't think I could do all 5 points in less than an hour, and I'm trying to keep these videos below 45 minutes. I'm trying to target 30 minutes to make good use of my time and your time, and not make them too long, because from what I hear from millennials, if it's more than 10 minutes people are going to watch. Well, there's no way these are going to be less than 10 minutes, but I'm going to do my best to try to keep them within the 30 to 35 minute range on average, and if we go over that, so be it. But again, you can always break these videos down as you have time to watch them. And again, you're going to have my full outlines every week to go through and to keep and to go over. So let's go ahead and start. And so today I want to answer the question, does God exist? We're going to look first at the first argument is going to be that God makes the best sense of the origin of the universe. And then the next argument we're going to look at in our time together is that God makes sense of the fine-tuning of the universe for intelligent life. So that's the 2 points we're going to look at today. I'm going to be just following William Lane Craig's argument, and so it's best if you have this printed out and are looking at it with me, just to follow along. I'll bring out a few points along the way to just show you what William Lane Craig is doing in making this case for the existence of God. So the very first thing William Lane Craig does is he gives 5 good reasons, and I'll give you the other 3. They're there in your outlines. God makes sense of objective moral values in this world. We'll look at that next week. 4th, that God makes sense of the life, death, and the resurrection of Jesus. We'll look at that next week. And then number 5, God can be immediately known and experienced personally. And again, we'll look at that next week. So we're going to look at the first 2 arguments today. C.S. Lewis once remarked that God is not the sort of thing one can be moderately interested in. If God does not exist, there's no reason to be interested in God at all. On the other hand, if God does exist, then this is of uttermost importance. And again, if you look at encyclopedias from the past, I'm not sure about what that looks like on the internet today, but when I had the printed page and encyclopedias, I subscribed or had 2 of the most used encyclopedias in the world. One of those was Encyclopedia Britannica, and the longest 2 articles in both those encyclopedias were the articles on God. As a matter of fact, Will Durant, who wrote a huge history of the world, various volumes, I can't remember how many volumes, but they're all over 1,000 pages roughly thick. The longest discussion by Will Durant was on God, and Mortimer Adler says the same thing in his expansive writing on history. And it's because there are more ramifications on whether or not God exists or doesn't exist than any other ultimate question. So this question that we're looking at, does God exist? We're taking our time through this because there's a lot of reasons to believe cogently and logically that God does indeed exist, and that the case for God, I think, is better than the case for God not existing. And so let's get into it. And the first 3 reasons why God existence makes a difference. So this is a different thing than what we're going to be looking at with the other 5 reasons for God's existence. These are just good reasons for why God's existence actually make a difference in our lives. I'm going to go through these quickly. First of all, reason number 1 why God's existence makes a difference is that life is ultimately meaningless if there is no God. There's absolutely no meaning to life, no purpose, if this is it. And so Craig writes, if God does not exist, life is ultimately meaningless. If your life is doomed to end in death, then ultimately it does not matter how you live. In the end, it makes no ultimate difference whether you existed or not. Your life might have a relative significance in that you influenced others or affected the course of history, but ultimately mankind is doomed to perish in the heat death of the universe, and ultimately it makes no difference who you are or what you do. Life is simply inconsequential. And then, thus, the contributions of the scientist to the advance of human knowledge, the research of the doctor to alleviate pain and suffering, the efforts of the diplomat to secure peace in the world, the sacrifices of good people everywhere to better the lot of the human race, ultimately all these things come to nothing. Thus, if atheism is true, life ultimately is meaningless. And then reason number 2 of why God's existence makes a difference is without God, we live without hope. If God does not exist, then we must ultimately live without hope. If there is no God, then there is ultimately no hope for deliverance for the shortcomings of our finite existence. For example, there's no hope for deliverance from evil. Although many people ask how God could create a world involving so much evil, by far most of the suffering in the world is due to man's own humanity to man. The horror of 2 world wars during the last century effectively destroyed the 19th century's naive optimism about human progress. If God does not exist, then we are locked without hope in a world filled with gratuitous and unredeemed suffering, and there's no hope for deliverance from evil. If there is no God, there's no hope of deliverance from aging, disease, and death. Although it may be hard for you, if you're younger, to contemplate the sober fact is that unless you die young, someday you yourself will be an old man or an old woman fighting a losing battle with aging, struggling against the inevitable advance of deterioration, disease, perhaps even senility, and finally and inevitably you will die. There is no afterlife beyond the grave. Atheism is thus a philosophy without hope. So no meaning and no hope if there's no God. And then third reason, if God exists, you can know his love personally. On the other hand, if God does exist, then not only is there meaning and hope, but there's also the possibility of coming to know God personally. And the infinite God should love you and want to be your personal friend is a reality. This would be the highest status a human being could enjoy. Clearly, if God exists, it makes not only a tremendous difference for mankind in general, but it could make a life-changing difference for you as well. Now, admittedly, none of this shows that God exists, but it does show that it makes a tremendous difference whether God indeed exists. Therefore, even if the evidence for and against the existence of God were absolutely equal, the rational thing to do, I think, would be to believe in the existence of God. That is to say, it seems to me positively irrational when the evidence is equal to prefer death, futility, despair over hope, and meaninglessness over happiness. So, William Lane Craig starts out with 3 reasons that the reality of God is radically important. If he doesn't exist, there's no meaning. If he doesn't exist, there's no hope. If he doesn't exist, we can't really have a personal relationship with something that's greater than us. And it is interesting that we all usually, typically, even consciously and subconsciously for sure, worship something greater than ourselves, even if it's the world or nature or what have you. So there's this incredible desire for us to know or have a relationship with something that's bigger or higher than ourselves. Okay, so 5 good reasons why William Lane Craig makes the case for God's existence, and I think he's right on all 5 points. But we're going to look at the first 2 today, first looking at the origin of the universe. So let me read to you William Lane Craig's argument. And again, he makes many arguments for the existence of God. This is just a few of them. So here's what he says. He says, have you ever asked yourself where the universe came from? Why everything exists instead of just nothing? Typically, atheists have said that the universe is just eternal and that's all. But surely this is unreasonable. Just think about it for a minute. If the universe never had a beginning, that means that the number of past events in the history of the universe is infinite. But mathematicians recognize that the existence of an actually infinite number of things leads to self-contradictions. For example, what is infinity minus infinity? Well, mathematically, you get self-contradictory answers. This shows that infinity is just an idea in your mind, not something that actually exists in reality. David Hilbert, perhaps the greatest mathematician of the 20th century, states, "The infinite is nowhere to be found in reality. It neither exists in nature nor provides a legitimate basis for rational thought. The role that remains for the infinite to play is solely that of an idea." So David Hilbert wrote that on the infinite in his philosophy of mathematics. Now, I want you to notice one of the things that William Lane Craig does. In almost every single quote that he makes, he's quoting a non-Christian. And so what he's doing is he's connecting in his argumentation with the logic and the reasoning of non-believers of why God exists. And that's part of the strategy of the classical philosopher or the classical apologists, is to be on equal ground as much as possible with the non-believer as it relates to truth, and constantly getting them to see the truth not in a biased way from just Christians, but in an unbiased way, pointing that non-believers are pointing to God. And so they're wrestling with these ideas, pointing them to their own people, their people who believe like them, unbelievers, rather than just quoting from Christians and immediately quoting from the Bible. You start with the natural world, you start with reason, you start with logic, and then work your way to the Bible. So that's what the classical apologist does. And I just want you to take note of that as we move along. Next, he says this, but that entails that since past events are not just ideas, but are real, the number of past events must be finite. Therefore, the series of past events can't go back forever. Rather, the universe must have begun to exist. This conclusion has been confirmed by remarkable discoveries in astronomy and astrophysics. So what he's going to do is he's going to quote from physicists and astronomers to make his case. And again, he's not quoting from Christian astronomers and physicists, but non-believers, to show that it's rational and logical to believe that God indeed exists. In one of the most startling developments of modern science, we now have pretty strong evidence that the universe is not eternal in the past, but it had an absolute beginning about 13.8 billion years ago in a cataclysmic event known as the Big Bang. What makes the Big Bang so startling is that it represents the origin of the universe from literally nothing. For all matter and energy, even physical space and time themselves, came into being at the Big Bang. Now I want to take a time out for a second. Last summer, I did a series of 8 sermons, which can be found on our website at Valley Baptist Church, San Rafael in California. And you can hear the 8 sermons that I gave. And what I did is I gave all the different arguments for the origin of the universe and how science and the Bible relate. And so I gave old Earth views, I gave young Earth views, I gave the intelligent design view, I gave the gap theory view, and several other views. And so you can hear all that if you go to our website and look back last summer. That would be 2019, about June, July, August of 2019. If you look at those messages, and if you need the outlines, just email me. My email's on our church website at Valley Baptist San Rafael. But you can get into that, and maybe I'll get into some of those things as our apologetic series moves forward. But here's what I want you to realize, that there are solid Christians. I mean, William Lane Craig is very much a Christian, but he has views on some things that I don't necessarily agree with. But where we agree is that the universe had a starting point. I, at this point in my life, happen to be more of a young Earth proponent, and I just don't think there's enough evidence that has convinced me of billions of years, okay? But there are other Christians, like William Lane Craig, that are convinced that the Big Bang really happened. It happened 13.8 billion years ago, and they'll make a case for that. And when I read those guys, I sort of get it, but on the other hand, I have some issues as well. So here's the point, though, that the age of the Earth, as far as I'm concerned, is not that big of a deal. When you're trying to reach an atheist, you want to start with as close to what they believe as you possibly can if you're going to build a bridge with them. If they believe 13.8 billion years, I'm going to turn them on to William Lane Craig's argument, because William Lane Craig is going to get them to God, and then he's going to get them to the Bible, and he's going to get them to Jesus. A young Earth person is going to do the same thing, but a young Earth person is probably, you're not going to get to first base with somebody who believes in 13.8 billion years. If you say it's only 10,000 or 15,000 years, they'll blow you off and they're not going to listen to you. So the point isn't to win an argument. The point isn't who's right and who's wrong. The point in apologetics is you're trying to build a bridge with a non-believer and win them over to Christ. You're doing everything you possibly can. You don't want to compromise truth. You don't want to compromise what and why you believe, but sometimes you might want to hold off on things that you believe in to get them to Christ and have them wrestle with maybe some of the issues later on. The whole point in dealing with people is you want to constantly answer questions and build bridges and basically say, hey, have you considered, you believe in 13, I don't think it's quite that long, but have you ever wrestled with some of the arguments from the young Earth people? And if they're not willing to do that, stick with what William Lane Craig is doing here. You may not agree with what I'm saying, and that's okay. But again, the goal and the point of knowing what you believe and why you believe it and how to share it is not to win arguments. It's to win somebody to Christ. It's to get them as quick as you can to the gospel. And so there are Christians that are old Earth, there are Christians that are young Earth, there's Christians that are everything in between, intelligent design, and have various views, gap theory, and so forth. But what we all believe is that there's a creator, and that the universe did not come from nothing and it's not eternal, but there's a creator. Where we disagree is on the fine points of how he created. And so I hope you don't get too hung up on that. I just think that a lot of people get way too hung up on the age of the Earth, and that by doing that they can alienate the non-believer. So I hope you get that. I hope you understand that. If you struggle with that, that's okay as well. But again, the goal in this series and my personal goal is not to alienate non-believers, but to try to build bridges with them. and I hope that's your goal as well. Okay, let's keep moving on. So he then quotes P.C.W. Davies, who is a non-believing astrophysicist, I think. I know he's an astronomer, but he may be technically an astrophysicist, very well known. He's written a lot of books that have been read by a lot of people, even lay people. And here's what he explains. The coming into being of the universe, as discussed in modern science, is not just a matter of imposing some sort of organization upon a previous incoherent state, but literally the coming into being of all physical things from nothing. So he's quoting a non-believing astronomer to basically say that's exactly what the Bible says, that science says the same thing the Bible says, okay? Then he says, of course, alternative theories have been crafted over the years to try to avoid this absolute beginning, but none of these theories has commended itself to the scientific community as more plausible than the Big Bang. In fact, in 2003, Arvind Borde, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin were able to prove that any universe which is on average in a state of cosmic expansion cannot be eternal in the past, but must have an absolute beginning. Vilenkin pulls no punches, and then he quotes Vilenkin. Quote, "It is said that an argument is what convinces reasonable man, and a proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning." End quote. And that's from Alex Vilenkin, Many Words in One, The Search for Other Universes. And then he says that problem was nicely captured by Anthony Kenny of Oxford University. And he writes, quote, "A proponent of the Big Bang Theory, at least if he is an atheist, must believe that the universe came from nothing and by nothing." End quote. So he's saying that to be an atheist and believe in the Big Bang is absurd. That would mean that something comes from nothing. And then, but surely that doesn't make sense. Out of nothing, nothing comes. So why does the universe exist instead of just nothing? Where did it come from? There must have been a cause which brought the universe into being. So he summarizes the origin of the universe in 3 statements. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. That's number 1. Secondly, the universe began to exist. And then thirdly, therefore, the universe has a cause, and that cause is God. Specifically, the God that reveals himself in the scriptures. Okay, so given the truth of these 2 premises, the conclusion necessarily follows. From the very nature of the case, the cause must be uncaused, changeless, timeless, and immaterial, and an immaterial being which created the universe. It must be uncaused because we've seen that there cannot be an infinite regress of causes. It must be timeless and therefore changeless, immutable. At least without the universe, because it created time. Because it also created space, it must transcend space as well and be immaterial, not physical. It must also be personal. For how else could a timeless cause give rise to a temporal effect like the universe? If the cause were a mechanically operating set of necessary and sufficient conditions, then the cause could never exist without the effect. For example, the cause of water's freezing is the temperature being below 0 degrees centigrade. If the temperature were below 0 degrees centigrade from eternity past, then any water that was around would be frozen from eternity. It would be impossible for the water to begin to freeze just a finite time ago. So if the cause is permanently present, then the effect should be permanently present as well. The only way for the cause to be timeless and the effect to begin in time is for the cause to be a personal agent who freely chose to create an effect in time without any prior determining conditions. For example, a man sitting from eternity could freely will to stand up. Thus, we are brought not merely to a transcendent cause of the universe, but to a personal creator. Isn't it incredible that the Big Bang Theory thus confirms what the Christian theist has always believed, that in the beginning God created the universe? Which makes more sense, that the Christian theist is right, or that the universe popped into being uncaused out of nothing. Okay, so that's the first argument that he gives. And then the second argument he gives is the fine-tuning of the universe. That the existence of God makes the best sense of the fine-tuning of the universe for intelligent life. That out of all the planets, out of all the astronomical stars and so forth that exist, the only place where there is intelligent life is planet Earth. And so why is that? And that points to the fine-tuning that is of a creator who designed this planet for intelligent life. And so now he gives his case for this. So first we looked at the origin of the universe. Out of nothing, nothing comes. Something exists, and that something that exists that brought that which is into being is God. Okay, that was the first point. Second point, God makes sense of the fine-tuning of the universe for intelligent life. And so here's what Craig says. He says, during the last 40 years or so, scientists have discovered that the existence of intelligent life depends upon a complex, delicate balance of initial conditions given in the Big Bang itself, or in creation itself. Scientists once believed that whatever the initial conditions of the universe, eventually intelligent life might evolve. But we know now that our existence is balanced on a knife's edge. The existence of intelligent life depends upon a conspiracy of initial conditions which must be fine-tuned to a degree that is literally incomprehensible and incalculable. So this fine-tuning is of two sorts. First, when the laws of nature are expressed as mathematical equations, you find appearing in them certain constants, like the gravitational constant. These constants are not determined by the laws of nature. The laws of nature are consistent with a wide range of values for these constants. Second, in addition to these constants, there are certain arbitrary quantities which are just put in as initial conditions on which the laws of nature operate. For example, the amount of entropy, or the balance between matter and antimatter in the universe. Now, all of these constants and quantities fall into an extraordinary narrow range of life-permitting values. Were these constants or quantities to be altered by a hair's breadth, the life-permitting balance would be destroyed and life would not exist. For example, the physicist, he is a physicist, P.C.W. Davies has calculated that a change in the strength of gravity or of the atomic weak force by 1 part in 10,100 would have prevented a life-permitting universe. The cosmological constant, which drives the inflation of the universe and is responsible for the recently discovered acceleration of the universe's expansion, is inexplicably fine-tuned to around 1 part in 10,120. Okay, huge numbers here. Roger Penrose of Oxford University has calculated that the odds of the Big Bang's low entropy condition existing by chance are on the order of 1 out of 10 to the 10. That's 123 zeros. Penrose comments, quote, "I cannot even recall seeing anything else in physics whose accuracy is known to approach even remotely a figure like the 1 part in 10,000, 1010, 123 zeros." And it's not just each constant or quantity which must be exquisitely fine-tuned. Their ratios to one another must be also fine-tuned. So improbability is multiplied by improbability until our minds are reeling in incomprehensible numbness, or numbers and numbness. Now there are 3 possibilities for explaining the presence of this remarkable fine-tuning of the universe: physical necessity, chance, or design. Physical necessity, chance, or design. Those are the only 3 possibilities. So, the first alternative holds that there is some unknown theory of everything, or TOE for short, which would explain the way the universe is. It had to be that way, and there was really no chance or little chance of the universe's not being life permitting. By contrast, the second alternative states that the fine-tuning is due entirely to chance. It's just an accident that the universe is life permitting, and we're the lucky beneficiaries. The third alternative rejects both these accounts in favor of an intelligent mind behind the cosmos who designed the universe to permit life. So which of these is the most plausible? The first alternative seems extraordinarily implausible. There's just no physical reason why these constants and quantities should have the values they do. And then he quotes Paul Davies again, quote, "Even if the laws of physics were unique, it doesn't follow that the physical universe itself is unique. The laws of physics must be augmented by cosmic initial conditions. There's nothing in present ideas about laws of initial conditions remotely to suggest that their consistency with the laws of physics would empty uniqueness or imply uniqueness. Far from it. It seems then that the physical universe does not have to be the way it is. It could have been otherwise." So that's Paul Davies. For example, the most promising candidate for TOE to date, superstring theory or M theory, fails to predict uniquely our universe. In fact, string theory allows a cosmic landscape of around 10,500 different universes governed by the present laws of nature, so that it does nothing to render the observed values of the constants and quantities that are physically necessary. So, what about the second alternative, that the fine-tuning of the universe is due to chance? The problem with this alternative is that the odds against the universe's being life-permitting are so incomprehensibly great that they can't even be reasonably faced. Even though there will be a huge number of life-permitting universes lying within the cosmic landscape, nevertheless, the number of life-permitting worlds will be unfathomably tiny compared to the entire landscape, so that the existence of life-permitting universe is fantastically improbable. Students or laymen who blithely assert, quote, "it could have happened by chance," end quote, simply have no conception of the fantastic precision of the fine-tuning that's requisite for life. They would never embrace such a hypothesis in any other area of their lives. For example, in order to explain how there came to be overnight a car in one's driveway. Some people have tried to escape this problem by claiming that we really shouldn't be surprised at the finely tuned conditions of the universe. For if the universe were not fine-tuned, then we wouldn't be here to be surprised about it. Given that we are here, we should expect the universe to be fine-tuned. But such reasoning is logically fallacious. We can show this by means of a parallel illustration. Imagine you're traveling abroad and are arrested on trumped-up drug charges and dragged in front of a firing squad of 100 trained marksmen, all with rifles aimed at your heart to be executed. You hear the command given, "Ready, aim, fire," and you hear the deafening roar of their guns, and then you observe that you're still alive, that all of the 100 trained marksmen missed. Now, what would you conclude? Well, I guess I really shouldn't be surprised that they all missed. After all, if they hadn't all missed, then I wouldn't be here to be surprised about it. Given that I'm here, I should expect them to all miss. Well, of course not. You would immediately suspect that they all missed on purpose. That the whole thing was a setup engineered for some reason by someone, while you wouldn't be surprised that you don't observe that you are dead, you'd be very surprised indeed that you do observe that you are alive. In the same way, given the incredible improbability of the fine-tuning of the universe for intelligent design, it's reasonable to conclude that it is not due to chance, but it's due to design. In order to rescue the alternative of chance, its proponents have therefore been forced to adopt the hypothesis that there exists an infinite number of randomly ordered universes composing a sort of world ensemble or multiverse of which our universe is but a part. Somewhere in this infinite world ensemble, finely tuned universes will appear by chance alone, and we happen to be one such world. And again, I want to take a time out here, and it's amazing the lengths that people will go to deny the existence of God. And so I continue. There are, however, at least two major failings of the world ensemble or multiverse hypothesis. First, there's no evidence for it. Absolutely none. No one knows if there are other worlds. Moreover, recall that Bohr, Guth, and Vilenkin proved that any universe in a state of continuous cosmic expansion cannot be infinite in the past. Their theorem applies to the multiverse too. Therefore, since the past is finite, only a finite number of other worlds can have been generated by now, so that there's no guarantee that a finely tuned world would have appeared in the ensemble. Second, if our universe is just a random member of an infinite world ensemble, then it is overwhelmingly more probable that we should be observing a much different universe than we actually in fact observe. Roger Penrose has calculated that it is inconceivably more probable that our solar system should suddenly form by a random collision of particles than a finely tuned universe should exist. So if our universe were just a random member of a world ensemble, it's inconceivably more probable that we should be observing a universe no larger than our solar system. Or again, if our universe were just a random number of a world ensemble, then we ought to be observing highly extraordinary events like horses popping into and out of existence by random collisions, or perpetual motion machines, since such things are vastly more probable than all of nature's constants and quantities falling by chance into a virtual infinitesimal life-permitting range. Observable universes like those are much more plenteous in the world ensemble than worlds like ours, and therefore ought to be observed by us. Since we do not have such observations, that fact strongly disconfirms the multi-universe hypothesis. On atheism at least, it is therefore highly probable that there is no world ensemble. So once again, the view that Christian theists have always held, that there is an intelligent designer of the universe, seems to make much more sense than the atheistic view. of the universe, that it just happens to be by chance, fine-tuned to an incomprehensible precision for the existence of intelligent life. So we can summarize the second argument, the fact that God makes the best sense of the fine-tuning of the universe thus. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Secondly, it is not due to physical necessity or chance. 3, therefore, it's due to intelligent design. So we've seen in our lecture today, in our session today, that the origin of the universe and the fine-tuning of the universe leads us most reasonably, logically, cogently to believe that God exists. So hopefully we'll see you next week. Let me pray for you. Father, I just want to thank you for those who are watching. I pray that for those who are Christians, this would just give them even more confidence in the fact that you're listening to us right now, that you have intelligently designed the universe with purpose, with meaning, and that we have a hope beyond this. And we're going to look more at that next week as we get to Jesus. Thank you for William Lane Craig and men and women like him who have a tremendous amount of intelligence and ability to be able to debate with the most antagonistic of atheists and people who deny Christianity, and do such a good job of presenting a great case for why we believe what we believe, why we believe it, and they share it so well. And I pray that their tribe would increase, that you would help us to get more knowledgeable about what we believe, why we believe it, and how to share it with others. And I pray even this week that some of what we looked at today we can use in real conversations with real people who need Jesus. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you.